Sup folks, welcome to the part 9, of What If Deku Run an Orphanage, Chapter 50. Shorts 12 sore loser Nara sighed, as she stood in front of her brother's room. Ever since his loss to Kiba, he had been held up there and was in a terrible mood, to say the least. And so now here she was. Alright. Time to be a good sister, she told herself, as she knocked on the door. Go away, Ken shouted out. Rolling her eyes, Nara decided to ignore this and enter the room anyway. Ken was laying on his bed, still pouting over his loss. He didn't even turn towards the door when he saw it open. I said go away. Well, I didn't listen, Nara responded. Hearing his sister's voice, he turned to look at her and scowled. Oh, it's you. What, did you come to laugh at me some more? No, I've done enough of that to last me a few days, Nara admitted, leaning against the wall and preparing to have a long, frustrating conversation. Great. One less person laughing at me. Now if all the hundreds of thousands of people who watched that stream could stop laughing, that'd be great, Ken said bitterly. If it makes you feel better, looking at the comments at that video, people are actually pretty impressed with you, Nara admitted. They're impressed that I got knocked around the forest like a ragdoll, Ken asked sarcastically. They're impressed you lasted so long against Kiba. She's not exactly someone many people can fight. Let alone as long as you did, Nara explained. She's an OPC for a reason. Yeah, well, so am I, Ken pointed out indignantly. I shouldn't have lost so easily. You lost as 4 arms, so easily. Nara and Ken turned around and saw Izuku entering the room. Ah, Mr. Midoriya. What are you doing here? Nara asked him politely. Well, I came to see if Ken was alright, Izuku explained, closing the door behind him. I'm fine, Ken said curtly, crossing his arms trying to seem tough. I doubt that, Izuku sighed. As I was saying, you only lost to her as 4 arms. You didn't lose to her as a whole. What's that supposed to mean? Ken raised an eyebrow with curiosity. It means you still have 8 other forms, doofus, Nara pointed out. Right. Izuku nodded. 4 arms was probably the worst form you could have used to fight Kiba. 4 arms power is strength, and you were trying to fight someone stronger than you. Remember what happens when you use 4 arms to fight Humongosaur? Nara told him. Ken cringed, as he recalled why he didn't do that anymore. He got literally stopped. Kiba in general is kind of a bad matchup for you. Her main weakness is that she gets weaker the more she uses her strength, but with your time limit it's unlikely you'd be able to get her to a point where you could beat her just by stalling her out, Izuku summarized. Your best course of action would be to take out your opponent as soon as possible, while also making sure you don't get too reckless. Easier said than done, Nara muttered. She knew he was talking about Ken, but this applied to her as well. Izuku nodded in agreement. You're right. It's very hard to both go on the offensive while also remembering to keep your eyes peeled for any tricks and counterattacks. But that's the reason you train. To improve and work on things that you struggle with. The 2 kids thought about that for a moment, realizing how true that statement was. Alright, if 4 arms was a bad match, then who would have been better? Ken asked, thinking about that question himself. Well, I think I'll leave that on to you. Izuku would give him an answer, but the more this kid thought about his forms and how they would work well against his opponent's quirk, the better. Remember, your quirks aren't the most powerful here, but they are the most versatile here. Play your cards right, and you could potentially beat anyone here. And with that, he left, leaving the 2 kids to think about what he told them. Well, thinking about it, Stinkfly might have been a better choice, Nara told him. But you couldn't have done much damage from the air, meaning you'd have to come down eventually, and that girl could just throw boulders or jump at you, so not exactly a guaranteed victory. If I used Igai, I might have been able to blast her away and keep her from me, Ken speculated. Guess I won't know until I try. And with that, Ken got off his bed and made his way to his door. "Where are you going?" Nara asked him. Ken turned to her and smirked. "I'm gonna challenge that girl to another fight. Let's see how she handles some lasers to the face." And just like that, he was gone. Nara shook her head, but a smile crept its way onto her face. "Can't keep that idiot down. I am not sorry brrrrrrr." In the forest, Ken was currently in his Igai form, practicing his aim on some trees. And given that he was mostly eyeballs, he was doing pretty well. Brrrrrr. Another tree branch was shot off, and Ken quickly celebrated. "Ha! I rule." Ken gloated. "Yeah, you do seem to have an eye for this," said a voice from the bushes. Ken turned around. "Hey, who's eyeing me up?" Then, K exited the bushes, with an all too pleased expression. "Sorry. I didn't mean to peep in the cornea. I thought I heard some being excited and wanted to take a look," said, opening up with a pun barrage. Ken squinted, as he immediately knew what was happening. He was being challenged. Challenge accepted. "Well, I was just eyelashing these branches off with MI lasers. I didn't blink anyone was gonna see me," Ken responded. "I guess I was wrong. Guess everyone has their off days. Well, I wink that you should take a break," responded. "Maybe have some ice cream?" "Nah, I'm fine. But my throat's a bit dry, so I could use some water," Ken said. "I wish I had a cup of it now." "Are you sure all you want is a wink? We have a nice PI waiting back home. And I wink you should give it a glance," said. "Brow about you? Go ahead and take sight for me," Ken responded. "I'll stay here and shoot a few more trees," but I insisted. "I have to ask, did you ever eat a pie before?" asked him. "If you view what you were missing out on, you'd seen up really quickly so you could get some." As the two continued their eye-based pun assault, Mew watched on from behind the trees, trembling. "Oh no now there's two of them," Mew whispered. "I have to warn everyone Oh no, I'm doing it too." Ken and K would eventually stop and return to the house, but Mew quarantined himself for the rest of the day to make sure no one else caught the virus. "What is okay?" Nara was currently studying in the library, with a large stack of books next to her and a notebook by her side to take notes in. Izuku walked into the library, and looked around, seeing that only Nara was present. So he decided to check on her. The girl was too engrossed in her own business to notice, and Izuku managed to pull up a chair and sit next to her without paying any attention to him. He watched her study so intently, it was admirable but something was wrong. "Nara," he said, getting her attention. "Ahhhh." Nara jumped in her seat and her head quickly swerved towards Izuku. "Mr. Midoriya. Please don't do that. Sorry. I wanted to get a closer look at how you studied." Izuku apologized. "What are you studying, by the way?" "Just some math stuff." Nara shrugged. "You haven't enrolled us in any schools yet and I doubt you have the time to homeschool us." Izuku sighed. School could be a bit of a problem once the ages of the kids he had under his care started to vary. He couldn't just give the same lesson to all the children anymore, as the younger ones may not understand it, and the older ones may already know it. So he had to find time to hold separate lessons for some of the kids, in his already tight schedule. "Sorry about that. I've been looking at hiring a tutor but my hiring process is a bit slow," Izuku said, simplifying his issues once again. "I can see that." Nara was still stunned that this place had no other human employees. "But, I want to have a successful future, so I have to work hard, and study." "Ah, I see. You are thinking seriously about your future. That's good. Just remember not to overwork yourself, and take breaks regularly. Overworking is bad for your health," Izuku told her, not giving a second thought to how much of a hypocrite he was. "Yes sir although maybe you should take some of your own advice." Nara gave him a look over and it was easy to see just how incredibly tired he was. "I'm fine. But Izuku brushed it off like usual. I have to work hard to keep this place operating ... But enough about me. I have a question for you. Why aren't you using your forms to help you study? I imagine XLR8 or gray matter could make this process much faster. Nara gave him a confused look. Isn't that kinda cheating? Everyone back at my old school told me that if I ever tried to use my quirk to help me in school then I would get detention, or worse. Izuku sighed and shook his head. No Nara, it's not cheating. Schools have a tendency to be one way or another. Either they feverishly discourage quirk use or they encourage it past the point where they should. And neither is a good way of handling it. So you mean it should be ... somewhere in the middle? Nara asked, not sure exactly what Izuku was getting at. It's not really hard to figure out. Let people use their quirks to further themselves, but don't let them use their quirks to hurt or bully others. Izuku stated. It's that simple. But wouldn't that give some people an unfair advantage? Nara argued. While she would have appreciated it if some people were less harsh, she did understand that using gray matter on tests would be a bit unfair to all the other students. Izuku paused for a moment, as he considered his next words. Nara. Let me tell you something, I learned when I was 5. Not all men are created equal. The moment Izuku finished that sentence, he got the expected reaction. Nara recoiled back, looking at him with both shock and a bit of confusion. I know, it's horrible ... but it's true. Izuku sighed. Some people are born with quirks that put them ahead in life, whereas others ... like myself, don't get to have a quirk at all. Nara's eyes got even wider at that revelation, and her mouth dropped. You're ... you're quirkless? Izuku nodded. I don't like talking about it much. But yes. I am quirkless. I'm kinda surprised you know about the quirkless. Most kids around your age have never even heard about them. I found out about them while I was doing a paper on the quirk wars, Nara explained, grimacing as she remembered what she read on how the quirkless were treated nowadays. Is it true ... that the quirkless are treated like that's not what we're talking about? Izuku cut her off, although in doing so he inadvertently gave her his answer, causing her eyes to widen in horror. Back to what I was saying, not everyone is born equal. Some people are given advantages because of their quirks and some are given disadvantages. But as someone without a quirk, I don't think other people should have to hold themselves back just to make me look not as bad. Quirks aren't a device or something that can be naturally separated from someone. It's part of you, and asking you not to use them is like asking you not to use your own arm. Nara looked at the Omnitrix and considered what Izuku was saying deeply. Schools ... and well society in general, have understandably hard time figuring out how to regulate quirks, Izuku explained, before getting up and gesturing to the room around them. But here is different. I own this house. And I own the land around this house. So what I say, goes. And I say that you are free to use your quirks as you please. In fact, I say you should. The more you get used to your quirk, the more control you'll have over it. Which means eventually you'll be able to reintegrate into society without the government worrying you'll set it on fire. My only request are that you don't hurt yourself, don't hurt anyone outside of sparring, and when you're sparring don't go too far and try to ease up on the property damage. Can you do that? Yes sir, Nara responded. Izuku slumped. Please, just call me Izuku. Suddenly, the door opened and a seer orb floated in and went up to Izuku. He looked into it and frowned. Well, it looks like your brother just destroyed one of the empty rooms. Ugh. Idiot. Nara facepalmed. Well, I have to go take care of that. Remember what I told you. Don't hold yourself back. Izuku told her, as he exited the room. Normally, this is where Nara returned to her studies, more determined than ever and willing to use her forms to get ahead. But right now she was a bit more concerned about Izuku. She held great respect for him and what he was doing and admired his work ethic. But at the same time, She questioned his decision to not hire more employees and was worried about the effect that it was having on his health. Effects that he was passionately denying, despite them being clear as day. Not to mention she just found out he was quirkless, and his unwillingness to talk about it implied very bad things about his past. All signs pointed to something going wrong, and Nara was left wondering if she would need to save someone long before she ever even got into UA Chapter 51. Fu's Notes 2. Hey, so this is a Fu's Note chapter, including all the new characters ... except for Junkin and Nara. There are a few reasons why. Firstly, it seems too soon. I just gave a long list of their abilities and forms just a few chapters ago. It feels repetitive to do it again. Also, I want to give those two an entirely separate Fu's Note all to themselves, because of how varied their quirk is. So just think that Fu wrote all this just before they showed up. Oh, and of course, as with all Fu Notes chapters, this will not be edited. Fukanoko Midoriya, Fukanoko, or just Fuku as she calls herself, is an 8-year-old girl with purple hair. She is the second most mysterious member of the family. The first being Mew, more on him later, and the third being Eerie. She stays in her room pretty much constantly, only really coming out at night to sneak into the kitchen. I've only interacted with her in person once and it didn't go very well, so she avoids me. Even now that she's started coming out of her room more often with a special hoodie on that covers her face, she still stays clear of me. Still looking for a way to make it up to her. But from what I've heard and seen, she's very, very easily frightened, and extremely paranoid, which is why doesn't leave her room. And she also puts herself down a lot. Although I heard she's been getting better and becoming less scared. Her quirk is called Fear Gas. Fukanoko can emit a gas from her skin that causes almost whoever breathes it to hallucinate their worst fears. It's bad enough to drive people insane. Although it fades away fast, the dangerous part is that this gas explodes from her whenever she panics. Which is a lot. Again, she's been working on it with Dad, but it's still very scary. Note, her quirk doesn't work on the undead. In other words, Midoriya Kai is very interesting. He's 40 feet tall, with 3 massive heads, 2 wings, 2 legs, and no arms. His body is like a snake combined with a dragon, and is covered in massive green scales. Also his blood and poison. Don't know how strong it is, but Izuku just said it's very strong. Kai can talk, and see, and do everything we do with one head using all 3 of his, but he doesn't have 3 separate personalities, just the one. Since he also lacks hands, he has to use his heads to grab things, which can go badly sometimes. You'd think he'd cause a lot of damage to people or things around him, but actually Kiba is way worse than him. Kai is very gentle and kind, and always tries to be extremely careful, which is good because he's so big. It can be weird looking at how big he is, and knowing he's only 7 years old. It confuses me how literally 40-foot Hydra with no hands can do less damage when he tries to pick something up than Kiba. Izuku Midoriya is 7 years old, and his body looks like it's made of some kind of weird moss. It's not actually moss though. Don't really know what it is. It's like some flesh-moss fusion thing. He's also tall. Like, really tall. He's like twice Izuku's height. And he has this weird ... tentacle on his face. With big bug eyes? It makes him scarier, which goes into his quirk. Anything that feels fear, burns at Izuku's touch. Or rather, if you feel a certain amount of fear and touch Izuku, you will suddenly catch fire. He wears a special cloak over his body so people don't touch him, although it can make him a bit scarier looking because it darkens his face. Izuku is pretty gentle, and likes quiet. He most hangs out in the greenhouse, the library, and the art room, and occasionally the pool when there aren't too many people around. I can relate. Also notable, he can't set Sansan on fire, most likely because she is a liquid. Mew Midoriya. Okay, I've never actually seen Mew. He's like Fukanoko, he doesn't like to talk to people. But apparently he does like to be around people. Mu's quirk is ... complicated. Dad said it lets him slip into another state or reality where no one can see or touch him, but he can see other people, and he can go through objects. He's a ghost. He's basically a ghost. And he likes to go around while invisible, and just look at people, according to Dad. Oh, and an important thing. Anything that goes into this other state of reality will start to fall apart pretty quickly. And even Mu will eventually start to fall apart, but that takes a lot longer. Yonda Midoriya Yonda is the ultimate privacy destroyer. And she embraces that. She's a 9-year-old girl with curly pink hair. Her quirk replaces her ability to hear and speak with sound, with the ability to hear people's thoughts and speak in their minds. And no, she can't turn it off. Apparently it still works a lot like regular hearing and speaking. It has the same range, and if you cover her ears and keep her mouth from moving she can't hear or talk. Which is weird because her quirk goes through walls. Maybe her ears and mouth are kinda like antennas or something. Because if you just cover her mouth she can still talk using her quirk. You have to actually stop her mouth from moving at all to silence her. Same with her ears, you can't just put your hands over them to stop them, you have plugged them up to make them unable to hear. In terms of personality she has two sides to her. One side is absolutely evil and uses her quirk to manipulate people. Kiba has fallen prey to this multiple times, and let's just say Yonda has never really had to lift anything heavy because of it. Although evil is an exaggeration. It's mostly just minor stuff. She doesn't do this often, but if she wants something or someone to do something she will get them to do it. Although times when she does this are kinda rare. Most of the time she's pretty nice. Using her quirk to try and help people with their problems. Breaking up, fights between Kiba and however Kiba pissed off that day. Kyozai Midoriya. Kyozai lies inside of me. Yes, you read that right. Kyozai is a living blob of black ooze that is about a year old. Kinda like Sanson but stickier and black. His quirk allows him to go inside people, and basically make it his home. This is called a bond, and it comes with upsides and downsides. The person he's inside, called the host. The upside is that it gives the host super strength, speed, durability, etc. It also lets them use Kyozai's body as armor or weapons. Notably, it lets you make tentacles that can stretch about 30 feet. The downside is that he makes you insane by enhancing your emotions, and eventually kills you by eating all your insides. So for most people it's not really worth it. Except for me, whose emotions are mostly dead, and whose insides constantly regenerate. So I get all the plus sides and none of the negatives. Well, except for Kyozai's weakness, fire and really loud sounds, I still have to watch out for that. Personality-wise he's a baby. Literally he's like a year old. All he really wants is to eat and for me to be active. Mind you, he can understand people, and he has intelligence, so one day he'll have more of a personality. Netsu Midoriya Netsu is a 7-year-old boy, who is constantly on fire. His quirk allows him to emit fire and shoot it out like Endeavor, while also making him immune to fire. He's extremely powerful, and one day he will get more powerful than Endeavor ever could be. The downside is that while he is immune to fire, his lungs are not immune to smoke, or a lack of oxygen. Turns out, fire is pretty bad for your breathing, so if he makes too much fire in a closed area, then he'll suffocate himself. Also, his quirk is incredibly hard to control. So it's almost impossible for him to go a day without setting something on fire, and it's pretty easy for him to lose control when he's attacking. He can also use his quirk to fly, although due to his difficulty controlling his quirk, he often crashes into things when he tries. Personality-wise, Netsu is a lot like an anime protagonist. Simple-minded, likes to fight and eat. Although apparently he has an interest in art? Which I didn't see coming. Most powerful list update 1. Sanson. Still really powerful and hard to hurt. 2. Yami. I really underestimated what Yami could do. The amount of negative energy he can get just by being in the city for a few hours is insane, And the types of Grim he can create keep getting weirder and more powerful. He gets stronger every day. It's very possible he could be more powerful than Sanson, but I'm putting him lower because if you actually manage to get to him through all the Grim, he can't really fight for himself. 3. Kai/Kiba/Netsu. It's hard to tell who is more powerful here. They all have advantages and disadvantages, but roughly speaking they're around the same power. 4. Me and Kyozai. Thanks to Kyozai I've gotten a lot stronger. Combined with my regeneration we're really hard to fight. Although my regeneration is still limited, and fire and loud sounds can mess us up. 5. Shruku. She has a lot of the same power as I do now if you replace tentacles with webs, except I think she's still a bit stronger and faster than me. But I regenerate and she doesn't, so she goes one spot lower. 6. Mew. It's really hard for me to place these two, because they don't have any real fighting ability, but their quirks can be an instant win in a lot of situations. If either of them catch you by surprise, they win basically unless your quirk counters there somehow. But Mew might have a hard time pulling people into his realm, and if you can get close to without looking at her you can beat her pretty easily. 7. Fukinoko. Her gas dissipates really quickly and is really short range. But if you do breathe it in you are beyond screwed. 8. Eerie. She can kill you with a touch. But she has to get close to you. She can also heal people ... eventually. She still has to work on that. 9. Atako. Same as Eerie, but Eerie's touch will instantly and definitely kill you no matter what. But Atako first has to make you feel afraid of him, and even then if he touches you just get set on fire which will probably kill you but it might not. Also he can't heal people. 10. Yonda. Not really a combat quirk, but she could probably use it to see what an opponent's strategy is. Not much but it's something. 11. Kyaku. Again, not really a combat quirk. Can't really use it too well in a fight. Tragic backstory list. 1. Eerie. 2. Sanson. 3. 4. Fukinoko. 5. Me/Kiba/Yami. Tai. 6. Kyaku. 7. Dad. 8. Yonda. 9. Shruku/Kai/Itako. 10. Kyozai. He did accidentally drive his mom crazy and kill her, but he really didn't understand what was happening, and still doesn't. He is a baby so we'll have to see how that affects him in the future. 11. Mew. I don't know what his backstory is. Chapter 52. Fall money problems. It was early in the morning and Izuku was at his desk, doing paperwork. Izuku liked to get up very early, so he could get stuff done before he had to make breakfast. The paperwork he was dealing with now was actually not something directly related to the children or the damages they cause. This particular mountain of paperwork he was doing was secure in income. Now one would think Izuku being a humble, selfless person who was also extremely rich, money would be the last thing on his mind. However, Izuku had come to realize that most of his money came from the government. He'd used up most of the thanks for taking down the Yakuza money by now, and his mother and the government were the only sources of income he had. And both of those weren't necessarily reliable. His mother's company was doing okay, but that could take a turn for the worst at some point. And the government was known for screwing people out of money. And while he was confident they couldn't do that to him, seeing that their contract said that as long as he was taking care of any OPC they were to give him money, he'd heard tales of people more confident than him who'd had the rug pulled under them, and were left with nothing. Now compare that to the amount of money he would need to spend to keep this operation going, were the government to stop supporting him. The cost of food, the cost of maintaining the massive house they live in, the cost of repairing the massive house they live in, the cost of fixing up the land around the house whenever it got too badly damaged, the cost of paying employees and maintaining their benefits when he eventually got some, and the absolutely enormous cost that came with maintaining all the kids' special needs like Kiba's blood, visors, Sanson's chemicals, Netsu's fireproof clothes, and items, Fukanoko's special room, the antidotes to Fukanoko's gas, Kai's everything. And those costs only increased with each kid he took in. But that was just the cost of the essentials. Izuku wanted to give these kids the best life he could, which included buying lots of video games, regular games, and sports equipment, and training equipment. On top of paying for all the stuff that came with each child's personal interests like Kiba's streaming equipment and Shruku's dressmaking equipment. In summary, Izuku needs to be rich at all times for this to work. So the more income, the better Izuku felt. Of course, there was Eerie's blood. While that money was also from the government, Izuku was much more confident that the government would continue. Why? Because it saved them a crap ton of cash. As mentioned, the cost of taking care of an OPC was a lot, and level 2 OPCs even more so. Meaning unless Izuku ramped up the price for Eerie's blood by 300%, they'd be saving so much money. Then there was the more conventional way rich people got richer. Investing. This, as expected, got Izuku a lot of money. And then there were the more specialized means that involved his children. Shruku often had a lot of leftover webbing and rejected or unfinished clothes made out of those webs, which the Spider Girl considered to be trash. Most of the world did not share that opinion, as ever since people started getting quirks that allowed them to make webbing, clothes made out of those webs had become luxury items, which sold for very high prices. This combined with the overall rarity of the material, made it so selling large amounts of quirk-produced webbing would make someone a very generous amount of cash. Of course, Izuku asked her permission before doing this, but as one would expect, Shruku didn't have a problem with her dad selling her trash. Fu'(s). Remains were also something he sold sometimes. Something he found about Fu is that the boy could not eat his own body parts. His body would literally reject them and throw them back up. So whenever someone would dismember, tear apart, behead, or any of the various things that could be done to the boy that would result in his body parts being thrown around, Izuku was often left with just pieces of human flesh and gallons of blood. He saved the blood for Kiba, and he would sometimes save the flesh for Shruku, but occasionally he was left with so much of it that he would just sell it online, where it would then go to people with flesh-eating quirks. All these methods required, of course, a lot of paperwork. Which is what he was doing now. Izuku laid his head on the desk for a moment and closed his eyes. He didn't need sleep, he told himself. His body wasn't screaming at him to get the hell back in bed, he told himself. He was fine, he told himself. He opened his eyes and looked at the clock, and sighed. In 5 minutes he had to make food. Meaning he would have to finish up the paperwork. Izuku took a deep breath and quickly got back to work. Today would be a busy day. He would need a lot of coffee. Morning lessons. Alright everyone, please hand in your homework, Izuku told them from behind his teacher's desk. In front of him were Eerie, Kiba, Fu, Kyaku, Shruku, Yami, Atoko, Yonda, Netsu, and Ken, all in desks in front of him. After feeding everyone in the house, it was time for class. Some of the kids were more ecstatic about this than others. And by that, he meant Kiba and Ken really didn't want to be here. Speaking of people not being here, Izuku had decided that Fuku, Kei, Mu, and Nara didn't need to attend. Fuku wasn't here for obvious reasons. She most likely wouldn't be able to stay conscious in a room with this many people, let alone learn anything. He would have to give her private lessons later on. Kai also wasn't here for obvious reasons. Izuku would again give him private lessons. Mu was pretty much the same case as Fuku. Lastly, Nara wasn't here simply because she didn't need to be. To put it simply, she was a level above all the other kids in terms of her studies, and she was still determined to study and learn even more on her own, so Izuku just left her to her own devices for now, much to her brother's displeasure. Speaking of Ken, he wasn't dumb. But it was clear that most of his intelligence was dedicated to figuring out ways to fight people, rather than any academic pursuits. This could be seen by the fact that everyone else had brought their homework to the front, except him. And Kiba. Izuku sighed. Ken. Kiba. Why is it that your homework isn't here with everyone else's? Oh I forgot. Ken obviously lied. To think you could be so empty-headed. Caretaker, I apologize for my homework's disappearance, but I have a perfectly reasonable explanation. Kiba cleared her throat. The grim ate. It. Yami raised an eyebrow. They're lying. Ken ignored it and Kiba forgot. Yonda told him. Both the called-out kids immediately turned towards Yonda and glared at her harshly. I kind of figured, but thank you, Yonda. Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose as he felt an intense headache coming on. You two, see me after class. The two looked very, very displeased, and were still glaring daggers at Yonda, who looked incredibly smug. Alright, today we'll be learning about biology, Izuku told them, and he pressed a button on a remote, and the blackboard flipped around, becoming a large screen. And to do so, we'll be watching a show called Cells at Work. Izuku tried his best to make sure his lessons were fun. And he put a lot of work into his lesson plans. Because after all, how could he expect the kids to put in the effort if he didn't? 4 hours later. Class was now done. Of course, his classes were drastically shorter than most school days, due to him cutting out all the unnecessary fluff that schools were forced to teach kids for no good reason. It also helped that they all lived in the same house, so if anyone had any questions they could come to him. However, while most of the kids left, 2 remained. Kiba and Ken, looking mighty unhappy. Let's start with Kiba. Izuku decided that going one at a time would be better. More precise and allowed him to focus more on certain things. Kiba, I know you don't forget to do these on purpose. But I also know the reason you keep forgetting is because you don't think it's important. Well, it isn't. Kiba pouted and crossed her arms. Yeah, if we're gonna be heroes then we won't need to do any of this stupid math stuff. Ken argued. You two do realize that to get into any hero school you have to pass a written exam, right? Izuku pointed out. Both their eyes widened, and it looked like he just told them they had a terminal disease. What? They both shouted. Yeah. It's a test with a variety of subjects from math to science to history. Izuku explained. And no matter how powerful your quirk is or how well you do on the practical exam, if you don't pass the written exam, then you don't get in. That's so lame. Ken shouted out in protest. Why does it matter if we're good at math and science and all that if we're strong? That is illogical. Kiba objected. Are you sure about that? Izuku asked them. Kiba, did you know that if you hit the air hard enough and fast enough, you can shoot out a blast of air? Or you can kick the air below you, to propel yourself, meaning you could basically fly? Kiba's eyes went wide once more, this time with wonder rather than horror. Really? Izuku nodded. That's right. All Might does it all the time, and you want to know how he figured that out? By learning physics and science. If you want to be number one then you have to not only learn how to control your quirk but learn about how it interacts with the world around you. And that means learning things like math and science. He then turned to Ken. And you should be especially motivated to learn about math because your quirk has a time limit. PSH, what does that matter? I'll just take down all the villains before my time runs out. Ken said arrogantly. Ken, we both know that that's not always possible. Izuku sighed and took a moment to think of something. Alright then Ken, if you can answer this hero problem, then I'll excuse you from classes. Ken peeked up. Wait, really? Izuku nodded. Alright. Bring it on. Ken challenged. Confident in his ability to take on anything hero-related. Alright, villains are attacking a park in the city. And the only heroes there are you and a hero with reconnaissance, that means gathering information, Quirk, who can't fight very well, and you are in your feedback form. The reconnaissance hero tells you that there are 18 villains, with 8 hostages. The villains are in 8 groups of 2. 7 groups have a hostage and the final group has the group's leader. The groups are spread around the park around 10 blocks away from each other, and it would take you about 10 seconds to defeat each villain. You have 10 minutes left in your transformation. What do? A. Charge in and try to fight all the villains and save all the hostages. Or B. Wait around the park's exit so the villains don't escape, so backup can arrive and take down the villains? Izuku asked. Ken seemed to think about that for a moment, but after a few moments, he made an expression that told him what he was thinking. Why am I even thinking about this? The answer is obvious. And then he said exactly what Izuku thought he would say. The first one. I just have to kick their ass as fast as I can. Ken answered. Wrong, Izuku said swiftly. Here is where math comes in. First, you take the total amount of area you have to cover. In that case, you would have to run 9 blocks. Then you also take in the amount of time you take to defeat all of the villains. Then you take in feedback's maximum speed. Putting all that together into an equation, and you'll see that it would take you over 10 minutes to do all that. Meaning you'd transform back into your normal form before it was done, and the villains would almost certainly kill you. So the wiser option would be to make sure the villains don't escape, while backup arrives. Ken wanted to argue. Because just sitting around and making sure villains didn't move sounded so much lamer than charging in and taking down all the bad guys. But what Izuku said also made too much sense for him to logically refute. That is one of the many situations where math is important as a hero. And I drastically simplified it for you. It's unlikely you'd be able to know that many details, so you'd have to make multiple calculations for multiple scenarios, and adjust them accordingly on the fly. For example, if one of those villains happens to have a powerful endurance quirk and would take a while to beat, you have to estimate how long it would take you to beat him, if you could at all, how much time you have after, and determine if it's smarter to maneuver around the villain and save the hostage, and then move on to save more hostages. Izuku continued. A miscalculation, or worse not making a calculation, with a quirk like yours, can kill you. Ken once again didn't say a word, instead just choosing to pout in frustration. It was another case of, he couldn't refuse what Izuku was saying, but he didn't want to admit he was right. Listen, I'll admit. Schools teach you a lot of useless information that you'll never need to know. It was scary to Izuku just how much time schools wasted teaching people things that no one needed to know unless that happened to get into a very specific field, rather than anything useful like how to deal with finances, first aid, or human rights and the laws of the country you live in. But I've done my best to trim away all the useless stuff you guys don't need while giving you everything you do need to learn and making sure you understand it. Which is what this homework is for. I can't go to all of you individually and make sure you understand what I'm telling you, so this is how I make sure. So I need you two to take this seriously. Both kids still looked unhappy but in a different way. It was clear that they had gotten the message and understood things better now, but they just didn't like what they were hearing. If you two continue to ignore the few responsibilities I give you, then I will have no choice but to take away your streaming and gaming privileges. Izuku saw fear light up in their eyes after he said that, as it seemed they were finally gonna start getting their acts together. I'll be giving you this homework to do as makeup work, along with today's homework. Izuku was interrupted by another coughing fit and pain in his chest. He quickly turned around, and covered his mouth, while leaning on the blackboard. Immediately the mood in the room changed, and Kiba and Ken both became a bit concerned. Caretaker? Are you ill? Kiba rushed over to his side, but Izuku held his hand out to stop her from getting too close and seeing the blood coming out of his mouth, and his pained expression. Fine. Izuku's words were broken up by coughs and pain, as he tried to catch his breath and not succumb to his weakening body and fall to his knees. Somehow he managed to pull himself together, and the fit subsided. Although a lot of chest pain still remained, he just powered through it. All right. I'm gonna go take some cough medicine. You two do your homework." Izuku then left in a hurry, never turning towards them as he ran out of the room. The two children stood there for a bit, Ken not really sure what to make of that. "Hey Kiba. Is it just me, or is Izuku hiding something? Like something bad?" Ken waited for a response, but Kiba didn't give him one, instead just standing there. Kiba? "I smelled blood," Kiba said. "Something is horribly wrong." Making calls. After spending a few hours cleaning up the blood coming out of his mouth, grading all the homework, tutoring the kids who missed out on class, and spending some time doing quirk training for Eerie and Netsu, it was time for him to look at the order list. The order list was a list that was on a bulletin board in the hallways where the children's rooms were. It contained everything the kids wanted Izuku to buy for that week. There were a lot of requests weekly, most of which were pretty standard. Shruku asked for more dressmaking supplies. Ken would ask for games. Kiba would ask for various items relating to her streaming hobby. But of course, sometimes they would request things that either Izuku couldn't or wouldn't buy. Netsu had somehow heard about Trigger and requested that, and that led to Izuku having to spend an entire class talking about why not to do drugs. Ked requested a chicken coop so she could have unlimited eggs, and then Izuku had to explain to her why that wasn't an option. And Kyozai would occasionally try to ask for chocolate, writing it on the board whenever Fu passed by and wasn't looking behind him. But really the bulk of the unreasonable request came from two kids. One of them was unsurprisingly Kiba, who requested things like a castle, wine, a weather control machine so she could make lightning strikes whenever she introduced herself, and a request to build a moat of blood around the house. She was still asking to the castle, to this day. The other one was surprisingly enough, Fuku, who despite her rich background, or maybe because of it, didn't seem to know how money worked and thought that you could buy anything. Most of her unreasonable requests weren't for physical objects, although she did at one point ask for a rocket ship so she could isolate herself in space, but were for things like happiness, courage, and determination. And so Izuku took the paper off the board and started reading it over. Alright, looks mostly reasonable, aside from Kiba's usual castle request. Izuku walked over to his office and sat behind his desk, as he reached for his phone. It was time for him to order supplies. Not just the list of things the kids wanted, but all the other things the house needed. Firstly, he needed to take stock of their food, check how much they had, how much would expire and what they had to throw out, and what they could feed to Fu before they check on what they needed to order. Before he had to do all this checking and inspecting manually, taking stock of every bit of food himself, but now he could do it all from his desk, thanks to the Sears. And when he ordered food, he didn't just order what they needed. He had to order a lot of surplus food. For two reasons. One, if something happened and the food got stolen or damaged or set on fire, then they wouldn't starve. Second, he always had to be ready in case DOC sent more children. He also had to take stock to see if there was enough protective equipment for the kids. Visor, Netsu's fireproof clothes, gas masks, and things of that nature. And once that was done, he could finally make some calls to place orders for all of this stuff. And once that was done, he then moved on to house maintenance. Firstly, he'd have the Sears go out all around the house, Kai's room, the storehouse, the greenhouse, and inspect them for damages. Once that was done, he filed everything into a comprehensive list. Then he called one of the construction companies he did business with, mostly the Urarakas, and asked them to fix it. Speaking of the Urarakas, being a small construction company from a small town that was adjusting to a new environment and new scale of construction, altogether, they sometimes lacked supplies, meaning Izuku would have to purchase them himself, which meant more paperwork and phone calls. This embarrassed the Urarakas horribly, and they promised that after some reformatting of their company this wouldn't happen again. He felt horrible for making them do all that work, but on the bright side, after the shot in the arm, he gave them they were doing much better and were on the path to becoming a bigger, more successful company. Back to the topic of work. After all that was done, it was time for reforestation. Izuku once again sent out the seers, who were such a godsend, into the forest, to check the areas where the kids had been, for trees they damaged or destroyed. Then he would make a call to have all the damaged trees chopped down, the stumps to be pulled out, all the fallen trees to be taken away, and for everything to be replanted afterward. Then once that was done, he was finally finished with ordering supplies and maintenance. This all had to be done bi-weekly. Unless of course one of the kids did something that would cause him to do it sooner, which happened often, so really it felt like instead of it happening every 2 weeks, he felt like he did twice a week. He had to do it fast though, because after this he still had to do all the paperwork for the QR branch. Literally deciding the fates of some people's entire lives. So he had a lot still ahead of him. As he was looking over the last part of the list, he saw something that made him pause. A maid. Someone had requested a maid. And next to that request was the sentence, "You need help, Dad." Immediately Izuku's head fell onto the desk. He felt like a failure. It was very apparent that the kids were concerned about his health. Yami had taken it upon himself to spend his time making new grim to help him. Children should not spend their time worrying about the health of their parents. They should be free to play and do as they wish, learning about the wonders of the world around them until they grow up to be well-adjusted adults and live happy lives. If he couldn't let them do that, then what was he even doing? Suddenly he started coughing again. Damn it, when I said I wanted to be like All Might, this is not what I meant. Izuku thought as blood flew out of his mouth. And then everything went wrong. Thud. Suddenly the little energy Izuku had seemed to leave his body, as he collapsed onto his desk. What? It became very hard to breathe as pain racked his body, and it felt like he was choking on his own blood. The last thing he thought before he fainted was, "I failed." And then everything went black for him. However, as it turns out, someone was listening to his thoughts at that moment. Outside the office, a few moments ago, Yonda walked up the steps to her father's office, determined to make him get some sleep. "I failed." She barely heard. She frowned before moving faster towards his office, stopping right outside the door. "Father. I'm coming in." No response. "Father?" Yonda was confused. It wasn't like he couldn't hear her. She was in range for her quirk to take effect, and she was literally speaking in his head. "Father, are you already sleeping?" No response. Yonda started to get worried. Something was wrong. She wasn't hearing anything. Which meant one of three things. 1. Either Izuku was in dreamless sleep, he wasn't here ... or he was dead. And it was very unlike her father to sleep so early ... well, early for him anyway, and he was normally here at this time. She might have been just being paranoid, but she wanted to make sure that was the case. So she opened the door, and was met with the sight of Izuku, limp on a desk that was dripping blood. Everyone in the house was woken up by a psychic scream ringing in their heads. Chapter 53. Fu was just walking through the kids' living quarters back to his room after eating in the kitchen when he heard the scream. It was the loudest he had ever heard Yonda, and it immediately pushed him into alert mode. "Yonda? Yonda, what's wrong?" he thought. But there was no response. Quickly he heard the doors around him open, and Sansen, Yami, Kiba, Netsu, and Shruku came out in their pajamas. Except obviously Sansen. "What was that?" Kiba asked in a panic. "That sounded like Yonda screaming," Shruku said. "But I don't see her anywhere." Netsu looked around. "She's not responding to my thoughts either," Fu told them, getting more and more concerned. "There you are." Fu turned around and saw Nara running towards them with Eerie, Atiko, Kyaku, and Quither. All still in their pajamas much like the others. Except for Atiko, who had hurriedly thrown his cloak on. "What happened? Is Yonda alright?" Eerie asked, clearly fearful for her sister. "We don't know." I haven't seen her and she's not responding. Fu once again explained. Looking at Nara's group, he noticed someone was missing. Where's Ken? Probably still snoozing. Nara shook her head disapprovingly. When he goes to sleep almost nothing wakes him up. But enough about him, we need to find Yonda. Just then, Mew came out of his dimension in front of everyone, scaring the crap out of them as it looked like he appeared out of thin air. Help. Dad. Yonda. The office. Help. Mew shouted at them, appearing disheveled and was hyperventilating. Apparently, that was all Mew could take as he almost immediately ducked back into his dimension. Who was that? Nara asked. Almost everyone else looked unsure as well, seeing as only Fuhai had really personally seen Mew. I think that was Mew, he looks like how Dad described him. Fu answered, it looks like something went wrong with Dad and Yonda in his office, we should hurry. It must have been serious for Mew to show himself like that. Kiba threw back to yesterday. With the blood she smelled coming from her father. And immediately fear gripped her, as she put two and two together. And so without a word, which was unlike her, she bolted towards Izuku's office. Naturally, no one else really could catch up to her, and she made her way to Izuku's office. She kicked the door off its hinges and was met with a horrifying sight. There in her father's office were Izuku and Yonda. Both passed out and were unconscious. Yonda was mostly fine, it seemed like she had passed out from shock. The real horror was with Izuku, who was limp on his desk that was dripping with his blood. For a moment Kiba was frozen in shock. Horror gripping her heart. Never has the sight of blood looked so unappealing to her. The paralysis didn't last long, as she dashed forward, grabbing the desk and throwing it aside, letting Izuku fall on top of her. Daddy? Kiba quickly laid Izuku out on the floor. She saw that the blood was coming from his mouth and not a stab wound or anything. But that was little comfort as he was still bleeding and not responding. Kiba started to hyperventilate as she lowered her ear to his chest, and much to her relief his heart was still beating. But after that, she didn't know what to do. She tried shaking Izuku but he wasn't responding at all. And the longer this went on the more she panicked. Daddy? Kiba started crying, scared out of her mind, for her adopted father. Meanwhile, everyone else, Fu, Nara, Eerie, Deku, Shruku, Netsu, Sansen, Kyaku, and Yami, all caught up. And saw Kiba weeping over Izuku's limp body with blood on his face. The reactions varied. Yami, Netsu, and Shruku all ran over to his body, all screaming out in concern. Eerie and Kyaku just stood there, too afraid and panicked to even move. Sansen just melted. She was so shocked by this, that she was unable to maintain her form, and thus just turned into a pile of goo on the floor. Nara, Fu, and Deku were all standing in shock. Although not for very long. Fu, predictably, was the first one to take charge. Someone get Dad's phone and call an ambulance. Fu shouted out to the others. He looked at the desk that Kiba had thrown aside, and saw that the phone had been tossed aside nearby. He uses one of Kyozai's tentacles to pick up the phone. Luckily it wasn't broken. After typing in the password, which only he and a few others knew in case of emergency, he called for help. All while watching his siblings panic and cry. If one could see it, the only word that could be used to describe it was disaster. Sometime later, Fuhai had a feeling something was wrong. Firstly, this was normally around the time someone would bring her breakfast. Whether it be Izuku or Riri. But today they were late. Very late. Did I do something wrong? Oh no, what did I do? Are they gonna leave me to starve? Oh God. Fuhai was naturally beginning to panic, and that is when there was a knock on the door. It's me and Eerie. Can you let us in? It was. And something was wrong. She was lacking her usual peppiness. And was never lacking in peppiness. Concern bubbled up inside her, alongside her fears. What is so sad about? Is it something involving me? Is Izuku getting rid of me? What could they be so sad about? 1,000 fearful thoughts flew through her head, but all of them only lasted for a second, before they were silenced by one singular thought. Stupid Fuku. Your friends are hurting. What else could possibly matter? And so, with more confidence than she ever felt in most of her life, she went over and opened the door. When the door opened, she was met with a sight that broke her heart. Was trying to keep herself together, and if Fuku was an idiot she might have believed she was okay, given that her visor covered her teary eyes, and was wearing a forced smile. But the smile was very obviously forced. The snakes on her head were slumped over and sad. Eerie was barely even trying to hide her distress. Her normally ruby red eyes were bloodshot red, and she could still see the tear tracks on her face. Her hair was an absolute mess, as she was still wearing her pajamas. She hid behind as if trying not to let Fuku see her in such a way. Never in her life has she seen her closest friends look so defeated, and all she could ask was, "What happened? D dad he got sick and he was bleeding and he tried to explain it, but she was very evidently falling apart and Eerie wasn't doing much better, as she started tearing up behind her. He's in the hospital, and Fuku didn't let her continue, and instead just brought the two inside, and wrapped them into a hug. The other two immediately hugged her back and started sobbing. Fuku liked Izuku. Heck, she even kind of looks up to him. So hearing that something like this had happened, was horrible. But she knew that Deku and Eerie, he was their father, and she couldn't imagine how they must feel, so she pushed her own feelings aside. She could worry and cry about Izuku later. Her precious friends needed her. And so she grasped onto strength she never knew she had, and carried on. Meanwhile, in Kai's room, Kai woke up with a huge yawn. It was a beautiful day outside. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and the Kaijo boy was confident that today would be another wonderful day. And then, the world sent Fu in there to tell him otherwise. Fu looked as he normally would, so Kai didn't suspect that anything was wrong. But on the inside well, calling him a mess would be inaccurate. Due to his quirk holding back his emotions, he wasn't overwhelmed by sadness and fear, but the sadness and fear were present, as well as a deep feeling of frustration. Fu. Good morning. Kai eagerly greeted his older brother. Is Kiba doing another stream? Kai was such a good boy. Such a good, happy, nice boy. And it killed Fu to have to say what he was going to say. But he already died once, so what was another one? No. I don't think Kiba's gonna be streaming for a while. Fu sighed. Kai gave him confused looks. He has 3 heads, so it looks not. Look. Kiba not streaming? That's not like her at all? Wait. She's not sick, is she? Fu shook his head. No, she's not sick, but Dad is. The giant boy's 3 sets of eyes widened with concern and fear. What? Dad sick? He was bleeding and he wouldn't wake up, so we had to get him to the hospital, Fu explained to him, looking away so he didn't have to see Kai's expression. Why? Tears started leaking out of Kai's eyes, hitting the ground like huge raindrops the size of toddlers. One of them fell onto Fu, drenching him instantly. As Kai sobbed, Fu decided to comfort him. So after a bit of climbing using Kyozai's tentacles, Fu made his way to Kai's head and gently hugged the top of his skull. Meanwhile, in Ken's room, Ken was currently fast asleep on his bed, snoozing without a care in the world. And then he was pushed off his bed onto the floor. Ow! Ken jolted awake from the pain of his noggin crashing onto the ground and was immediately irritated with whoever did that. And he already knew who it was. Wake up! Nara shouted at him, staring down at him anxiously. What the heck was that for? Ken pulled himself to his feet and glared daggers at his sister. Izuku got sick and had to go to the hospital. I need you to get up so we can figure out what to do now. Nara swiftly explained. trying to convey the urgency of the situation as much as she could in as little time as possible. Wait, what? If Ken was not fully awake before he was now? Izuku's sick, what happened to him? We don't know. All we know is that we heard Yonda screaming, and we found her passed out from shock and Izuku passed out bleeding on his desk. He wasn't waking up, so we had to call the hospital to take him away. Nara explained, once again as quickly as she could. I think he overworked himself. I mean, he is the only employee here. Oh, man, Ken muttered, his eyes wide in shock. Ken and Nara hadn't known Izuku for very long, but they'd come to like him as a guardian figure that watched over them, so him being in this state was a real bummer, to say the least. Most of the other kids are panicking, it's chaos out there. Me and the other kids who aren't freaking out are all meeting in the cafeteria to figure out what to do. That includes you. Nara threw some clothes at him. So get dressed. Ken, for once, quickly did what she told him to do, without complaint. Before following her to the cafeteria. A few moments later, in the cafeteria, Ken, Nara, Fu, and Deku were all gathered, sitting down at one of the lunch tables. There was a seer orb next to Nara, just so that way she could keep tabs over the house. Why are you wet? Ken asked Fu, whose entire body was still soaked. I had to tell Kai about what happened to Dad, and he started crying, Fu explained. As you can see, his tears are as big as you'd expect. Let's focus here, guys. Nara brought everyone's attention to her. First, where is everyone and what are they doing? Last I checked, Eerie and Quirk with Fukinoko, crying. Kai is in his room, also crying. Kiba, Kyaku, and Yami have locked themselves in their rooms and are probably crying. Netsu and Sansan have gone outside to vent out some stress, and probably also cry. Shruku is in her room trying to keep it together while stress eating and crying. Yonda is still passed out, but she'll probably wake up and cry, and I have no idea where Mu is, but he's probably either in his room or in his dimension, crying. Fu explained. So everyone but us is freaking out and crying. Ken summarized. Great. Suddenly Ken's stomach growled, setting off a chain reaction of people of stomach growls. Okay, the second thing we need to figure out. Who is making food? Nara asked them all. Because Ken and I can't cook. Hey Fu, isn't your whole thing that you eat a ton of food? Don't you know how to cook? Ken asked the zombie boy hopefully while clutching his stomach. Fu shook his head. I can't get sick, and I can't taste anything. So I just eat all my food raw. Gross. Nara cringed before everyone turned to Atako. Atako shook his head, signifying that he indeed could not cook. Everyone wilted a bit as they realized they may have a situation on their hands. I think Yonda and Yami know how to cook, but they're out of commission. Fu sighed. And the only other one who can cook is me, said an unfamiliar voice from the entrance. Everyone looked towards the door and saw Fuku, walking in, with her hoodie over her face. Fuku? Fu was actually shocked. He figured that Fuku would have definitely stayed in her room with Eerie and for a long time, maybe even days. Isn't that the super shy girl that hides in her room all day every day? Ken asked bluntly. Yup, that's her, Fu confirmed. What happened to Ken and Eerie? They're with Kyaku. I wanted to help, Fuku admitted. You need someone who can cook, right? Well, I know how. If that's alright with everyone. Hey, I'm not complaining about not going hungry. Do what you want. Ken told her. Yeah, thank you for coming. We really appreciate the help. Nara smiled at her, trying to reassure her. Fuku blushed slightly under her hoodie. I'll go into the kitchen now. Just as she was about to run off, Fu spoke up. Wait. Let Atako come with you, you'll need him to help you get stuff off the tall shelves and lift heavy things. Is that really necessary? In truth, Fuku was already freaking out as it was. She desperately wanted to run back to her room, but she was determined to stick around and help, if only for Eerie and kesseki. Also her own, because if no one was cooking then they would all die of starvation anyway. But she wouldn't lie and say that Ituko's imposing figure and horrifying physique didn't make her have second thoughts. Well, it's either him or you get to deal with the Grim. Fu already knew what her answer was gonna be. Never mind, I'll work with him. Fuhai had barely seen the Grim, but from her limited experience with them, she knew they were not something she would be comfortable working about, to say the least. Alright, I'll take care of my own and Kai's food by the way. That doesn't really involve any cooking anyway. Fu told her. Alright. Okay. Fuhai responded, trying very carefully not to do anything to offend anyone. See, can I start cooking now? Yes, go ahead, Fu told her. Immediately Fuhai bolted towards the kitchen, running so fast it was a wonder she didn't trip on her way there. Ituko got up from the table and followed her, at a significantly slower pace. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, Nara spoke, allowing them to continue the discussion. What do we do now? Did Izuku leave any instructions in case something like this happened? Ken rolled his eyes. Do you really think he'd plan on actually? He did. Fu pulled out a note from his pocket. Ken crossed his arms while Nara gave him a smug face, but only for a second, before getting back to business. Alright, the note is mostly just him apologizing and putting himself down, but the actual instructions say that we should call Grandma and ask her to come over here to take care of us. And if that takes too long we should ask the wild pussycats for help. Fu explained. Wait? Isn't that a hero group? Nara asked, confused as to how they would be involved. Izuku would baby Kota, a kid that was under their care. So they kind of owe him one. Fu explained. They're weird but they're pretty good at their jobs and they know how to do all the adult stuff. So we should just focus on holding out until they get here. Alright. Until then, the three of us should take on all the house chores, along with the Grim. Nara ordered. Right. Fu agreed. Right. Ken groaned, hesitantly agreeing. He wasn't a huge fan of doing more work, but he also knew that he didn't really have much of a choice given the situation. Nara sighed. I hope whatever Fukanoko makes is nutritious because I have a feeling I'm going to need the energy. Okay, so heads up. Things are gonna be moving kinda slowly. Because I need to take in the full scope of this. This chapter was just the first part of the first reaction phase. Basically, it's about people getting notified about Izuku and what happened to him and their immediate reactions. The next chapter will continue this, with Inko, Okako, All Might, some of Class 1A, and some other people close to Izuku, learning about what just happened. Then after that, we'll be moving into the next phase, which is the deeper reaction phase, where we get news on Izuku's condition, and what everyone's thoughts and feelings are about this, in a more in-depth way. That will most likely take 2 of 3 more chapters. Next, we'll get to the rebuilding phase where Class 1A comes in to take care of the children while Izuku is unhealthy and still has no employees. This will go on for a while. This will also be where we rebuild the children's mental states and make them happy again while dealing with Izuku's physical and mental issues. Then we'll reach the end of this arc where Izuku hires new people to help around the house, and Class 1A leaves. I just wanted to give everyone a clear idea about how this was gonna go, so that way they better understand the pace I'm going for. Speaking of pace, yeah, I did take a bit too long to get to the collapse. I have a thing where I ended up accidentally stretching things out way longer than I meant to, and stories that I plan to end up taking way longer to get through than I thought. Chapter 54. Inko felt like a terrible mother. She left her son, her only son, all the way in another county. And now he had fallen sick. Grandma? Fu said over the phone. Grandma, are you okay? Fu, the dear sweet boy, had been the one to notify her of Izuku's collapse. Seeing as he was the only one of the children who wasn't freaking out, who had also met Inko. Inko wanted to say that she was okay, but she was just so overwhelmed at the moment, that all she could do was balk like a fish. "Grandma, do we need to call an ambulance for you too?" Fu asked her. And no dear," Inko managed to say, pulling herself together just enough to finish the conversion. I just need a second. How are all the other children? Most of them are crying. Only 5 of us are keeping everything together right now. But the pussycats are coming to help out until we can figure out what to do," Fu explained to her. "Oh, dear." Inko bit her lip. She may not have gotten to know all the kids that were now under Izuku's care, but the ones she did know, loved their new father with all their hearts. She could only imagine the heartbreak they were going through right now. "I'll try to come back as soon as I can. I know it's a lot to ask, but please keep everything together until then. We're trying, Grandma." Fu sighed. Then in the background, Inko heard something break. "Oh. I have to go." Sanson broke something again. "Goodbye, Fu. I love you," Inko told him. "I love you too, Grandma," Fu said, before hanging up. Immediately once the conversation was done, Inko stood up from her desk and yelled at her office staff. "Everyone, I'll be going back home for a while. My son needs me. Wild pussycats." It was a peaceful morning at Pussycats HQ, which was given a lot of inappropriate names that they refused to acknowledge. The Pussycats themselves were sitting back in their living room, enjoying some nice, freshly made coffee. Mandalay leaned back into the couch. "So nice. After so much work we finally get a vacation." Pixie Bob stretched out on the couch, much like a cat. Tiger and Ragdoll's relaxed sighs were their response to that. Pixie Bob turned to Mandalay. "Hey, you think we can pawn Koda off on Izuku and have a real vacation?" Mandalay turned and gave her teammate a soft glare. "I heard that Padocat," Koda said as he walked into the room. "But that's actually a good idea. At least I like being there," Mandalay sighed. Koda's time with Izuku has dulled Koda's edge, so at the very least he wasn't going around looking like he'd stab anyone who looked at him wrong. Now he just looked like he hated everything and everyone around him. Which was true in most situations. "Well, I was hoping we could spend a bit more time together since now I have some free time," Mandalay told him hopefully, getting the expected look of disgust from Koda. "Brrrr." Mandalay took out her vibrating phone and looked at who was calling. "Huh, it's Izuku. That's weird. He rarely calls." She pressed accept and then held up the phone to her ear. Meanwhile, Koda was just hoping that Izuku was calling to get him out of this lame house. "What?" Mandalay suddenly shouted, startling everyone else in the room. Everyone looked at Mandalay and saw a fearful expression on her face. And immediately a concerned feeling filled the room, most notably in Koda. They watched as Mandalay listened intently for a while, before saying, "Right. We'll be there as soon as we can." Mandalay hung up and looked at everyone. Izuku collapsed and had to go to the hospital. Everyone's expression shifted into concern, while Koda looked downright terrified. "Oh my God, is he okay?" Pixie Bob was the first to ask. "They don't know. They still haven't heard back from the hospital, so they don't know what his condition is." Mandalay, as a pro hero, has been in this situation many times before. Someone is taken to the hospital, and the waiting period where you don't know what's going on, it's the worst part. She can't even imagine how the kids feel going through this. Speaking of kids, she turned her attention to Koda, because he had also been in this situation before, and it ended with his parents being dead. And predictably, it looked like Koda was going through a PTSD flashback currently, and Mandalay wasn't sure what to do about it. He wrote down that if anything were to happen to him and no one else was around, that he'd like us to help take care of the children until they could work something out, Mandalay explained. But our vacation. Pixie Bob looked like she was going to cry. Come Pixie. The kittens need us. Ragdoll told her. Vacation or not, we're still heroes, and right now there are some children in need. Tiger added. Pixie Bob mourned her now lost days off. Fine, let's go help the kitten. Mandalay's eyes never left Kota. She felt like she should reassure him somehow. Say that Izuku was going to be okay. But she already knew what his response would be, having lived with him long enough. That's what they said about my parents. Okiko. Okiko felt like something was off. Which she shouldn't, because right now her and the girls of 1.A were hanging out, having a sleepover at Taru's house. She should be having a blast, and she was. But there was just this nagging feeling in the back of her head, that something was wrong, and it involved Izuku. Now to be fair, it was just a feeling. She had no real reason to think this other than Izuku's tendency to overwork himself, and while she hadn't heard anything from him in a little while, that was mostly because Izuku thought of himself as a blight on everyone's existence and never called or texted because he thought it would disturb them. Speaking of Izuku. Hey Uraraka, how's your boyfriend? Mina asked with a huge shit-eating grin. Ugh. Mina, if I have to say this again, I'm gonna send you to the moon. He's not my boyfriend. Me and Izuku are just really good friends. Okiko shouted with embarrassment. Op. She never said Izuku. Tara pointed out, come on, we all know what Mina meant. Tsu sighed. Aren't you guys tired of this yet? Yeah, it's like every other time we meet up. Okiko complained, her face still red. Never. Tara and Mina shouted. To be fair, Midoriya is an interesting topic, Momo spoke up. It still bothers me that our government has to rely on a 15-year-old boy to do something they themselves should be capable of. When clearly he needs therapy. Yeah, it still confuses me how the hell that happened, Jiro added. Brrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr out, and saw that Okako's phone was ringing. It was easy to know which one was hers because she was the only one with a flip phone. $5 it's Midoriya. Mina shouted out eagerly. Okako sighed and got up. To see who it was. It was Izuku. Of all the times to call, Okako whispered, before getting a bit confused. But why is he calling? Not wanting to keep Izuku waiting, Okako picked up the phone. Hey, Izuku. Okako greeted in her usual friendly voice. Knew it. Mina shouted out in the background. Hey, Okako. Fu was the one on the phone. Not Izuku. I have bad news. Immediately a pang of fear filled her. Wait, what's wrong? Where is Izuku? In the back, all the girls looked confused. And a bit concerned. He got sick, Fu explained. We found him, bleeding in his office. And he wasn't waking up. It felt like a bucket of cold water splashed onto her at that moment and then hit her in the gut. What? Okako was quiet, her voice fearful, more fearful than the girls had ever heard her before. And instantly they knew something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. He's at the hospital. We don't know what's happening with him yet. Fu explained. That's. Okako was a bit overwhelmed. She didn't know what to say. Okako? What's wrong? Tsu got up to check on her best friend and saw that she was tearing up a bit. Aye. Okako stuttered. I'll give you some time, Fu told her. And I'll call you when we get news about Dad. Goodbye. And with that, he hung up. Okako? Okako, what's wrong? Tsu kept asking her, putting an arm around her to try and comfort her from whatever was happening. Your Araka, what happened? Momo and the rest of the girls soon joined in crowding around her to see what the heck happened. Izuku in the hospital, Okako eventually said after pulling herself back together. They don't know what happened but he must have overworked himself. I kept telling him, over and over, to hire some employees. And he didn't listen. Him and his freaking trust issues. Oh my god, I am going to kill Rikugo. All the girls seemed a bit taken aback by this. While I do agree that it's likely Midoriya's affliction was caused by overwork and that Bakugo did play a large part in developing his trust issues, violence won't fix this, Momo told her. Okako knew this, but she didn't really know what would fix the situation, and she was really upset and wanted a reason to punch Bakugo. I think you should sit down, Sue told her. The girls brought her to a chair and had her sit down. They told her that Izuku would be fine. And Okako agreed. Because she had to believe that that was true. The staff members of UA had gathered in the meeting room, after hearing about Izuku's collapse. So we're all in agreement that that took way longer than it should have. Midnight spoke first. Yeah, hats off to Midoriya, he sure has the endurance of a hero. Snipe could only imagine doing as much paperwork as Izuku did in hell. Can we focus? 13 told everyone, before turning to Nezu. Nezu, do you know what exactly is wrong with him? What's his status? I'll be honest, I didn't expect him to be physically able to continue working as he did. It is in fact rather impressive. Nezu admitted. It also means that the fallout was worse than what was expected. Although given Midoriya's sheer willpower, I doubt he'll let this kill him. That being said, DOC is on top of the situation, and Midoriya is receiving the best healthcare he can get. When he recovers we should talk to him about 1A assisting him. At this point, I don't think he can refuse. And if he tries we'll send in Uraraka to convince him otherwise, Aizawa added. The teachers muttered agreements, except for All Might, who was mostly silent. Yagi, you look like someone shot your dog, or gave another valid criticism of America, Aizawa said to All Might, giving him his usual deadpan look. It's just ... Is this my fault? All Might asked somberly. A lot of things are your fault, you're gonna have to be more specific, Aizawa asked. Young Midoriya overworking himself. I feel like ... As his role model, I may have inspired that behavior. All Might was aware that he abused his body. I mean, look at him. He coughed up an alarming amount of blood every day, and now it seemed like Izuku was starting to do the same. I mean, yes, but what about it? What do you regret saving all those people? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Don't start with the self-deprecation, Yagi, he copied that from you too. This was mostly the fault of Midoriya himself, and the quirkist environment that destroyed his sense of self-worth. I suppose ... I just feel like I could have said something to him. All Might sighed. It's probably a good thing you didn't, Nezu said. After all, your words wouldn't have mattered much if you still went around being a massive hypocrite. You know better than anyone, actions speak louder than words. Chapter 55. That Yami fully understood why DOC was afraid of his quirk. Yami's opinion on his quirk hasn't changed much throughout his life, despite the massive changes in his life over time. At first, it was just a thing he had. A tool he was born with to help him survive. Like his arms and legs. Back when he lived in the wild, he didn't really have much time to think about it. Occasionally when he had eaten well, and was near a river and gazed upon his own reflection, he would wonder why he was the only one in the forest that looked the way he did. That could do the things that he could, and he'd wonder if he would ever meet something else like him. And then he did. When he saw Izuku and all the other children, he saw not only beings like himself, but beings who felt things other than negativity. He saw love and happiness. This of course led him to his new life. As another kid in the orphanage, Yami still viewed his quirk as but another tool, one that he would now barely use. He no longer needed to fight for survival, so why would he need to create more grim? At first, when he got here he just wanted to lay back and relax, meaning he only really needed his grim to carry him around. It did kind of freak him out a bit when he realized just how much of a power gap there was between him and the other kids. Back in the wild, he was the apex predator, the one on top. But here, not so much. Many of the kids could easily tear through his grim, and kill him if they wanted to. However, as time went on he got more and more comfortable, as the knowledge that they wouldn't do that sunk in. But then Izuku asked him to create some more Grim, to help him around the house, and to act as security. And who was he to refuse the man who had given him everything? So he did. By watching Izuku work with these Grim, he began to realize that he could use his quirk to help Izuku out more. By learning about the world around him, he could create new Grim that could help Izuku out in new and different ways. So he started doing just that. This caught the attention of the other children, mainly Kiba, who further led him into the rabbit hole of Grim making. Still, it was limited. And despite his Grim being useful, most of them weren't overly powerful. Sansen, Kiba, Shruku and many of the other children could still rip through them in seconds, and it made Yami wonder why he was classified as an OPC, and why the world apparently feared him. Not that it bothered him. Most of the kids weren't super resentful of their status as OPC. Except for Fu, whose negative emotions flared up a very tiny bit whenever it was brought up, and Kyaku, who was oh so full of hate. It was just confusing to him that he was given the same classification as his powerful siblings. And then the UA trip happened. Or rather, that's when his trip around the city happened. Yami had only been outside the house once, to go to the amusement park. And it was surprising to see just how many people there were, but overall it was a place of fun and joy, so he didn't get a good understanding of how much more powerful he could become when he was around large numbers of people. But his drive around the city opened his eyes. In just a few hours, he had gained more negative energy than he had ever had in his life. Much more. To put it into perspective, if all the negative energy he had ever gathered was a pond, then the amount he got from that trip was the sea. That was when Yami understood he was so much more powerful than he thought. He could create entire armies, make mighty beasts that could destroy forests and towns, and even give his siblings a hard time. Except for Sansen. She was still far too powerful. After that, he kinda understood why DOC feared him. But once Izuku collapsed, he got a real good understanding as to why the world did and should fear him. When Yami was born, he didn't have any concepts of emotions or feelings. So he had to learn about them from his quirk. He realized that the dark energy he absorbed off of animals was negative feelings because they'd come off of the animals more when he hunted them and when they were dying. So it's not like it was new information that his quirk was powered by people's bad feelings. But he never truly understood what that meant until now. Once Izuku fell, the negativity in the house exploded. Going back to the bodies of water comparison, if the normal amount of negativity he absorbed was a pond, then now it was like a lake. Still nowhere near as much as he got from his trip to the city, but still significantly more than usual. Now, he had a good understanding of what it was that powered his quirk. Calling it negative energy, and bad feelings seemed to downplay it. In truth, his quirk was powered by suffering. All the suffering his siblings were going through right now was feeding him, making him more powerful. It was messed up. It felt wrong. It made him understand people's fears about him. Because not only was he strong enough to cause mass suffering, he would benefit from it. Knock knock. As Yami was musing on his bed, there was a sudden knocking on his door. Just by glancing at the door, he knew who it was. After all, there was only one person who wasn't bursting with negativity right now. "Come in, Fu," Yami said, just loud enough for it to be heard on the other side of the door. Fu entered the room. His expression was his normal blank one, but he could see that there were more negative emotions in him than normal. But notably less than yesterday. Maybe that meant good news? Turns out, yes. Dad's going to be okay. Fu blurted out, wanting to get that across as quickly as possible. The hospital called the pussycats and they said he'll live. He overworked himself and that caused his body to weaken. And it also weakened his immune system, which is how he got so sick. He'll be asleep for a few days, and he'll be very weak and sick for a while, but he should make a full recovery. There was about a minute of silence after that. Until Yami responded. He overworked himself, Yami repeated dejectedly. So I failed. No, Fu said firmly. If it weren't for your Grim, then it would have been a lot harder for him, and he may have worked himself to death. Your Grim helped Dad a lot, he just took on too much work. Work that could only be done by people. You did the best you could. But it wasn't enough. Yami countered with a light growl of frustration. He suffered. And I could do nothing. Fu was silent for a moment. But then eventually spoke. There really was nothing we could have done. Dad wouldn't listen, no matter what we did. He loved us too much to trust anyone else to take care of us. Maybe this needed to happen? Yami gave him a weird look. Fu shrugged. If Dad wouldn't listen to us and hire some help, maybe he will now after all this. Dad is stubborn, not dumb. Yami thought about that. As Fu said, it was clear Izuku needed to hire human help. And it made sense that after almost dying and worrying all his kids half to death, that he wouldn't want to repeat this. So maybe something good could come out of this. Anyway, the pussycats keep talking about how useful your Grim are, and I've seen them do things that would have been either impossible or really hard for Izuku. Like lifting heavy things, feeding K, and other things. Don't blame yourself for this. Fu told him, before turning around to leave. As Fu was leaving, Yami asked him a question. Is my quirk ... evil? The Grim child asked. Fu froze for a second, before looking back at Yami. You've heard what we told Eerie, right? Eerie's quirk doesn't need people to be in pain, Yami argued. Ah. I see. Fu understood where this came from now. You don't like the fact that you're getting stronger from everyone suffering. Yami nodded. Fu paused for a moment, to consider his response. A quirk is only evil if you use it to be evil. Your quirk doesn't make people suffer. It takes their suffering and uses it to make Grim. If you use your Grim to help people, then you're just taking something bad, and making something good out of it. Yami's eyes widened. Something ... good. Right, Fu confirmed. You've been a big help to everyone in the house. So Fu did a thankful bow to him. Thank you for everything, little brother. And please continue to help us, in the future. There was another moment of silence before Yami started nodding frantically. Yes. Fu's lip twitched upward in what was almost a smile. I'm glad. And with that, Fu turned to leave. But Kyozai had other plans. One of Kyozai's tendrils popped out of Fu, and grabbed Yami, bringing him towards Fu. What? Yami was shocked and tried to struggle out of the tendril's grasp. Oh. Fu got the message Kyozai was sending. Kyozai wants us to hug. Yami didn't look pleased that Kyozai's method of asking for a hug was to grab him with a big slimy tentacle, but he didn't seem like he was going to refuse either. Kyozai plopped Yami down right in front of Fu, and the two awkwardly embraced. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Fuko didn't sign up for this. She only wanted to go outside, to cook some food for everyone and support her friends. That was all. But then they started asking her things. To be specific, after the pussycats got the call from the hospital, they asked the children that weren't freaking out, to tell everyone else about it. Leaving it up to them as they were less familiar with everyone. And Fuko was somehow considered one of the children not freaking out. So, now she had to tell Kiba about the news. Something she really didn't want to do. It's not that she didn't like Kiba. No, it was actually the opposite. Despite never meeting her in person, Fuko had gotten to know Kiba through her streams, and over time, came to admire her for her sheer confidence. Kiba was a person living her best life, without fear of anything. Whereas Fuko was a person, who was barely living. Trapped in her room by illogical fears and paranoia. She was Fuku's complete opposite, and given what Fuku thought of herself, how could she not admire her? With all that in mind, approaching her was terrifying. Not just because of her sheer speed and strength, but because of who she was. She was Kiba, Queen of Eternal Darkness, who commanded almost 1 million followers. The future #1 hero who could destroy buildings with her bare hands. And she was Fuku. A coward who stayed in her room and did almost nothing and didn't know what she would do in the future at all. She might as well be an ant in comparison to her. On top of that, Kiba was in a terrible mood right now. Who knew what she would do to an ant that forgot her place and tried to speak to her? She could get beheaded. But still, what was she supposed to do? Refuse? She knows what happens when you anger the adults. And these people weren't Izuku. She doubted they would be as nice. So here she was, standing in front of Kiba's door, her legs shaking. She didn't have Eerie for Fuku with her. She had already told them about the good news and naturally, the two of them cried tears of joy. They were probably still crying now. How could she interrupt their moment by selfishly asking them to help her? That would be cruel of her. And it may make them not want to be her friends anymore. And of course, Mew was nowhere to be found. Who knows, maybe he was next to her the whole time. She wasn't sure if that was comforting or creepy. Regardless, she had a task to do, and she needed to find the strength to do it. Okay, Fuku. Think. Maybe I could just say it from outside the door. Yeah. I don't even have to enter the room. Just yell it out from behind her door. Fuku took a deep breath, clenched her fist, and got ready to yell. La Lady Kiba. I have good news. Fuku shouted at the door. Izuku is going to be okay. The hospital called and said he was going to be okay. So. Fuku waited for Kiba to respond. But she never did. After about 2 minutes of silence, Fuku got the impression that maybe Kiba hadn't heard her. Lady Kiba? Did you hear me? Fuku asked. Still no response. That wasn't a good sign. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Can she not hear me? Is she not there? Fu said that Kiba has been in her room the entire time. Maybe she's asleep? Fuku wondered. Should I leave? But this is important. If I don't tell her Izuku is okay and leave her worrying for who knows how long, then she'll definitely be mad at me. What do I do? After a bit of panicking, Fuku decided the best course of action was to go inside and tell her face to face ... or rather face to hoodie. So using her shaking hand, she opened Kiba's door and prepared to face Kiba, the queen of eternal darkness. So she entered. And it was not what she expected at all. It was dark inside, the only light coming from the TV screen. From what she could see, the room was covered in scratches and holes, and many of the decorations were damaged in some way. And in the center of the room, was Kiba herself, sitting on the floor, just staring at the TV with her legs crossed. Her hair was a mess. Never before had Fuku seen her silver locks look so unkempt. It was like she spent the last few days in bed. And the fact that she was in her wrinkly pajamas as if they were the only things she'd worn for a while, supported this. It was an eerie sight, and also a sad one. Fuku carefully came into the room, almost tiptoeing. Lady Kiba? Fuku called out to her from the other side of the room. Kiba didn't respond. Fuku stepped forward, bringing herself closer and closer, until she was right next to Fuku, and was able to see her face. Fuku's eyes were glazed over, and bloodshot, and bags marred her usually perfect face. It looked like she had spent her nights crying rather than sleeping. Lady Kiba? Fuku called out, now right next to her. Huh? Kiba suddenly became alert, ripping her focus away from the TV, and onto Fuku. Fukunoko? WW, what are you doing here? Well, I needed to tell you something. Fuku explained, stuttering with fear and trepidation. I never thought I would be you, coming to see me, Kiba admitted. Her tone was about as sad as she looked. She didn't sound loud and cocky as she normally did. Right now she sounded quiet and fearful. It must be important if you came out of your room. Well, I've been doing that a lot after Izuku ... you know. Fuku didn't want to say what happened out loud, lest she anger the tiny queen. Nevertheless, Kiba's eyes darkened. Yeah, I know. Suddenly, Kiba's eyes widened, and a bit of life came back into them. Wait, is this about Daddy? Is he okay? Please tell me he's okay? Kiba was begging. Fuka would now. She had spent so much of her life begging. Begging for love from her parents. Begging for the pain to stop. Begging to be good. Begging for someone, anyone to save her. In front of her wasn't the strong and powerful Lady Kiba. The Kiba in front of her right now was just like Eerie and a little girl begging for her father to be safe. It was heartbreaking to see. He's okay. He's going to be okay, Fuku said, strongly. The hospital called and they said that he's gonna be sick for a while, but he'll make a full recovery. So don't worry. Kiba stared at her wide-eyed for a moment, before her eyes shut as tears started to pour out. And then she snagged Fuku into a tight embrace. A bit too tight. Lady Kiba. Please, you're crushing me. It took all of Fuku's restraint to keep her quirk from activating out of fear. Sorry. Kiba remembered her strength and held back a bit. I'm just thank you. Kiba continued to sob while keeping Fuku in her embrace her tight inescapable embrace. There Lady Kiba. Fuku fearfully reassured her, awkwardly patting her back to try and soothe her, so she could release Fuku from her iron grip. It's all gonna be okay. I was so worried. Kiba started sobbing into Fuku's shoulder. What? Unfortunately for Fuku, Kiba didn't plan on letting her go anytime soon. Chapter 56. Izuku couldn't wait to go home. When he had woken up in the hospital he was in a panic. What had happened to him? What had happened to the kids? He had panicked so much that the doctors had to knock him out just to keep him from hurting himself further. Once he had calmed down and been given a little time to recover, he heard from the doctors what had happened to him. He had overworked himself, which caused a myriad of health problems, including extreme exhaustion. And what's worse is that the strain he put on his body had weakened his immune system, meaning he was quite sick. Which made sense because Izuku felt like crap. He could barely move. He felt like he was going to vomit at any moment. Pain would randomly course through his body from time to time. He was coughing a lot. Fortunately no more blood came out, and he had nasty headaches. In other words, he had abused his body and so now it was abusing him. But none of that mattered at the time, because none of the doctors could tell him what was happening with his children. Fortunately, DOC showed up and explained everything. The kids had called him an ambulance, and after that, they called the pussycats, as he requested, and they came as quickly as they could. Izuku made a mental note to get them a nice gift for their troubles. DOC said that they would transfer him back to the house soon, with all the hospital equipment he would need, and some doctors would come from the house to check up on him and do whatever they would need to do to make sure Izuku recovered. After that, his mother visited. They had had a tearful reunion, which was pretty much the only way to describe it, as the two basically spent the entire time crying. After her, he expected maybe Okako to visit, but that was about it. What he had not expected was for his mother, Nezu, All Might's skinny form, Okako, Nemi, and Mandalay to visit him. All at once. Hey guys? Izuku coughed, his hoarse voice filled with shock at seeing all these people crowded around him. Midoriya, this is an intervention, Nezu told him. You can't do this job on your own, sweetheart, Inko told him, looking so concerned and worried that it broke Izuku's heart to even look at her. Look at what you've done to yourself, Izuku, you can't do this again. The kids were completely heartbroken when this happened. Mandalay looked so sad. And guilt stabbed into Izuku because he knew why. She was over there with the kids, watching them in their depressed and heartbroken states. And they were all hurting because of him. Young Midoriya, I understand that maybe I'm not the best person to be saying this, but it needs to be said. You can't do everything alone. Everyone needs a support system. All Might for a reason Izuku couldn't comprehend looked guilty. Like he was personally responsible for what happened to Izuku. And that made Izuku feel guilty in return. And we've been telling you this for months. Okako didn't yell, but you could still clearly hear the frustration in her voice, which was also made evident by her expression. Listen to kid. Think about how badly it would affect the kids if you died. Nami told him. It was pretty obvious that she was just here to make sure Izuku didn't get himself in this situation again. Because that would be really bad for her. I'm sorry. Izuku teared up. It was now that the weight of his failure was really pressing down on him. He'd hurt his kids by not hiring help. He'd been hurting his kids because they had to watch someone they cared for fall apart. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I failed. He could hear his old childhood tormentors now. Failure. Can't do anything. Useless Deku. Useless Deku. Useless Deku. Mr. Midoriya. Huh? Izuku was shaken out of his traumatic flashback by the feeling of something soft touching his arm. Nezu took the time to get a stool and stood on it so that way he could put his paw on Izuku's arm. Mr. Midoriya. We understand why you did what you did. People treated you harshly for most of your life. So then in turn to ask you to trust them with your children, who have also been treated poorly by the people around them. Is asking quite a lot. It's scary. But it's necessary, young Midoriya. It's not that you failed. You simply made a mistake. All Might told him gently. Which is fine. Everyone makes mistakes. What's important is that we learn from them, not wallow in them. Dude, it's not you. No one without some sort of infinite stamina quirk could do what you were trying to do, and not collapse. Nami told him. Heck, I don't think anyone without a stamina quirk could do what you were doing for half as long. Seriously dude, how the fuck did you do all that work for so long? Pixie Bob asked the same thing, Mandalay added. They had only been doing some of Izuku's work, split among 4 people and with some of the kids helping, and the blonde member of the Pussycats' first question was how in the actual hell Izuku could do everything he did and not die. Before making some very inappropriate comments about Izuku's bedroom durability in his more mature years. What we're trying to say is, don't despair. You're not dead, your children will eventually return to their happier selves. Let us focus on the positives, and do what we need to do to improve. Nezu explained to him. Izuku took a second to think. They were right. He was still alive, he was still in charge of these kids. Just sitting here crying about what he did wrong, won't fix it. You're right. I need to ... He wanted to say get back to work, but the pain, soreness, and overall numbness of his body reminded him that that would only result in making the situation worse. As much as he hated it, he needed to take some time to recover. But he also needed to help the kids now, more than ever. And what about his work for the QRD? Seeing Izuku's internal conflict and confusion, Nezu decided now was the time to strike. Mr. Midoriya, I would like to ask your permission for something, Nezu told him, earning a confused look from Izuku. I would like permission for Class 1A, with the exception of Bakugo Katsuki, to take up residency in your home for the next 3 weeks. And work for you. Izuku's eyes widened, and in the back Okako had the same exposition, not being in on the plan. Wait. Izuku coughed. What do you mean? I don't want to force anyone to work for me. And wouldn't that mean they'd have to stop their hero training for 3 weeks? I can't do that to them. Oh, don't worry about that, Mr. Midoriya. Should you let them use your training room, they can still make significant progress with their quirks, and they will still receive advice and instructions for our staff via the school website. Nezu explained. Still, asking them to juggle schoolwork and work around the house is asking a lot. Izuku retorted. Do remember that these are a total of 19 children. I think they can distribute the work to a very reasonable level. Nezu had prepared for Izuku to try and find reasons to refuse his offer. There was no way Izuku could reasonably say no here. And the others around him would make sure he stayed reasonable. And you don't have to worry about forcing them to work for you. I think many of the students will in fact be eager to help you. Yeah. Okiko ran forward and gave Izuku a determined glare. Everyone adored those kids. And so many of them are even fans of Kiba's channel. I've known them for months and I know all of them wouldn't miss a chance to help you guys out. So please. Let us help you. Aye. Izuku didn't feel right about this ... but maybe that was part of his problem? Alright. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Okay everyone, I have something important to tell you all, Eraserhead said to his class. Do you all remember Midoriya Izuku? Most of his class nodded, although the girls, who already knew what happened to Izuku, just got upset. Except for Okiko, who had a look of fierce determination ever since Izuku agreed to Class 1A helping him. She was gonna help her friend if it was the last thing she did. Well, he collapsed. Aizawa bluntly stated. This yielded the expected reactions from the expected people. The guys just looked shocked and upset about this development. While the girls remained the same, although they winced a bit and a few of them looked towards Okiko. Bakugo's reaction however was interesting. He looked shocked for the first few seconds like everyone else, before looking concerned for approximately half a second, before shifting into his typical angry, I don't care look. The class broke out into just noise. With so many of the students asking questions and saying things. Fortunately, they were silenced by the one student Aizawa was glad was loud. Everyone. Quiet down. Ida shouted while doing his standard air chop. We must get our concerns across in an orderly fashion. After a couple minutes everyone quieted down, and Aizawa spoke before anyone else could. Midoriya has been taken to the hospital and will make a full recovery. In fact, he's being transferred back home today. However, it will take him a lot of time before he can get back to work. Aizawa explained. So he can't go through the process of hiring employees at the moment. So that's where you all come in. All of you, except Bakugo, will be living at the Midoriya home, and working under him for the next 3 weeks. What? Shouted basically everyone except Bakugo and Okiko. Once again the classroom erupted into pure noise. But this time Aizawa took it upon himself to shut everyone up. Quiet. Aizawa activated his quirk, giving him intimidating red eyes and floating hair. And so everyone promptly closed their mouths and stopped talking. However, one student actually had the guts to raise his hand. Shito Todoroki, Aizawa sighed and deactivated his quirk. Yes, Todoroki? Why are we being sent in to do this? Shito asked. Out of everyone he'd reacted the least to the news of Izuku's collapse. He was still a bit shocked when he heard the news and deep down he was a bit concerned for the children under the green boy's care, but that didn't mean he wanted to go all the way there and take care of the kids, himself. We're hero students, not babysitters. What and heroes don't help people in need? Okiko glared at Todoroki. Those kids need our help and your Araka, Aizawa said her name sharply, stopping her in her tracks before he moved on to Shito. The reason why you are all being sent in to do this is because the list of people Midoriya trusts is small. And most of them are too busy to try this kind of thing. Mrs. Midoriya is available, but she wouldn't be able to do all that work by herself. Fortunately, that list of people includes your Araka. And she was able to convince him to allow you all to work there. You guys are pretty much the only option. And it might do you all some good to be reminded of why your jobs are important. Who you're working to protect, and why. Because it's incredibly easy for pros to lose track of that. That last sentence actually got Shito thinking about his father. Was that what happened? He lost track of what it meant to be a hero? That he was supposed to protect? That actually made some sense. And then combined with what your Araka had said, maybe he should just shut up for now. Also, despite our objections that such things were unnecessary, Midoriya has insisted that you will all be paid handsomely for your time there. Aizawa gave a resigned sigh. Let's just say at least I don't need to plan around any of you getting a part-time job in the future. Woo yes. Cheered about half the class. Bless you Midoriya. May nothing bad ever happen to you again. Mineta cried. Bakugo, how could you bully such a kind and innocent soul? Mina shouted. Eat shit Pinky. Bakugo replied. Which to be fair, you will be risking your lives with all these extremely dangerous children around, Aizawa said to kill their enthusiasm. Which worked pretty effectively. Taking the wind right out of their sails. Oh come on, they're not that dangerous. Okako tried to reassure them. Yes, they are, Aizawa said, receiving a betrayed glare from Uraraka. As much as I don't approve of DOC and the general public treating them like monsters. They're listed as OPCS for a reason. And while it is important that you treat them like children, you also have to keep in mind that they can accidentally kill you. Which brings me to this. Eraserhead pulled out a remote and pressed a button. Suddenly from behind him, a TV screen slid out of the ceiling and the tired hero stepped aside so everyone could see it. I will be explaining briefly about the quirks of kids you'll be taking care of, Aizawa told them. So pay attention. It's important if you don't want to die. Everyone was intensely focused, even Rikugo. If only because he was curious. Firstly, we have the one that started it all. Eerie Midoriya. Aizawa pressed a button, and the screen turned on, showing an image of Eerie. All you went most of the girls, as well as Kirishima and Kaminari. So this is Eerie. The one whose backstory must not be known. Mina said, before gasping. Are we gonna hear her? No. Aizawa cut her off immediately. Her story is so fucking classified that I don't know it. Heck, even she isn't allowed to fully remember her own past. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about her quirk, Rewind. The screen then showed a short video of Eerie rewinding an already eaten apple back into an uneaten apple. It allows her to rewind any organic substance back to a previous state. Whether it's back to a previous state of their lives, or even setting them back in evolution. Meaning she can literally turn you into a monkey. Aizawa said. But that is probably one of the better case scenarios. You see, Eerie has a hard time controlling her quirk, meaning that more likely than not, when her quirk is active, this happens. The screen then showed a video of Eerie making an apple vanish into thin air. Wait, what did she just do? Kaminari asked, confused on how rewinding something made it vanish. Did she rewind it back to a seed? Momo guessed. Close, she rewinded to before it existed, Aizawa said bluntly. She can do this to any living thing, including people. Wait. So if you touch her you die? Mineta shouted out in fear. You just instantly die? Basically yes, Aizawa said, keeping his blunt tone. Normally I would just tell you to stay away from her when her horn starts glowing, however, you all will also be responsible for helping her train and control her quirk. So you'll have to get close to her while it's on at some point. There were a few audible gulps among the class, and even Uraraka looked just a little bit nervous. Fortunately you will all be provided with a tranquilizer gun, which you should use if she loses control of her quirk, Aizawa explained. Wait. You want us to just shoot a kid? Mina shouted in slight outrage. I mean I know it's a tranq gun, but isn't that a bit extreme? There were a few mutterings of agreement with Mina's statement, across the class. Unfortunately, it is very much necessary. Just leaving her quirk active while it's out of control is extremely dangerous. Because as I said, if anyone touches her, they're dead, instantly. Aizawa reiterated. That seemed to shut down the objections, although everyone still looked a bit comfortable. Moving on. Next, we have Midoriya. Aizawa said as the screen showed. Pretty simple. Her quirk turns anyone who sees her eyes to stone for 24 hours. She has a visor to prevent this. If her visor is removed or damaged, replace it without looking into her eyes. And if someone does get turned into a statue, Make sure not to break them. Sero raised his hand. Yes. Aizawa sighed. If you get turned to stone ... and let's say ... your arm falls off. And then you glue it back together. Will you still have that arm? Sero asked. Yes, but it has to be put back perfectly. If even a small pebble is left off, it can have drastic consequences. Aizawa explained. So you better off just not risking it. Any more questions? Mineta raised his hand. You weren't supposed to have any more questions. Aizawa's eyebrow twitched. Yes, Mineta. What could you possibly have to ask? Are the snakes venomous? The great boy asked. Okay, that's a fair question. Aizawa thought. No. He saw some of the students breathe a sigh of relief. Alright. Moving on. Aizawa had a lot of kids to go through and he wanted to do it as fast as possible. Fuhai Midoriya and Kyodon Midoriya. You should already be familiar with them, right? The class nodded. Alright, just make sure to feed them absurd amounts of meat. And they'll be fine. Aizawa squinted. And also don't give them chocolate. It causes them to freak out, go berserk and temporarily die. Never thought I'd hear the phrase, temporarily die. Shinso chuckled, at the absurdity of the two words being put together. Next, Kiba Midoriya. You should be familiar with her as well. Aizawa brought up an image of Kiba. Especially if you hail the queen. Shouted out Kirishima, Mina, Taru, and Kaminari. Watch her YouTube channel. Aizawa wanted to go to sleep so badly right now. Anyway, she needs human blood to live, so just make sure to feed her blood. And beware of her absurd strength. Next. The screen changed to a picture of Sansen. Alright, Sansen Midoriya. You already know her quirk and why it's dangerous. The only thing I need to tell you is the special neutralizing procedure. Aizawa said. There are special chemicals that, when introduced into her body, rendering her acid harmless. It also changes the color of her body to blue. This has to be done every 24 hours. Mina raised her hand. No, Mina, I don't know what it would do to you. No, I don't think you should try it and find out. Aizawa saw that question coming a mile away. And just as he thought, Mina took her hand back down. Okay, next is Kyoko Midoriya. Aizawa pressed the button to show Kyoko on screen. Her quirk allows her to see into the memories of others and change them as she pleases, so long as she's touching their heads. Although if a victim of her quirk is met with a concrete contradiction to those false memories, their real memories will return. While this quirk is not actively dangerous, its potential uses are rather intimidating, and the girl herself has absolutely no qualms about using her quirk frequently and freely, especially on people she doesn't like. Which includes everyone not part of her family, who is also not your Araka. So while we're there, we have to worry about some kid lurking around trying to make us think we're a completely different person. Kaminari asked. She's not that bad. Okako tried to tell everyone. She's a bit rough around the edges, but she's an okay kid. And if you really want to get her to trust you, then just talk crap about Bakugo. Worked for me. Screw you, round face. Bakugo seethed. I exaggerated a bit, Aizawa admitted. Midoriya will keep her from doing anything too bold for the most part, and so long as she can't touch your head, she can't use her quirk. Man, guess I'll have to lock my door at night to keep the 6-year-old out. Taru giggled a bit at how stupid that sounded. Next, we have Shruku Midoriya. Aizawa showed an image of Shruku. Her quirk, as you can see, gives her the abilities and attributes of a spider, giving her super strength, speed, durability, the ability to shoot webs, climb walls, and she also can control other spiders around her. However, since spiders are cannibals, the only things she can eat are spiders and human flesh. No one could see it that well, but Taru was getting the heebie-jeebies. She had seen Shruku on Kiba's stream, and while she knew she was a perfectly nice girl, Taru just didn't like spiders. They creeped her out. She would get over it because, well, she'd have to seeing as she would be working with her now, and it would be extremely uncool to let something like this influence her opinion of a person, let alone a kid. But it wasn't going to be pleasant. Just keep her fed and everything should be fine. Next. The screen changed to an image of Yami. This is Yami Midoriya. You should already be familiar with him and his quirk. Honestly, you don't actually need to do anything to keep his quirk in check. In fact, he's actually extremely helpful. His grim act as both security and housekeeper. So if you need any help you can just use them. That being said, he could probably use a bit more emotional support. Lots of hugs. Got it. Mina nodded. It's gonna be weird to walk up to a demon ape and say, "Hey, can you carry this for me?" "Thanks." Sero laughed a bit. Alright, next is Fukunoka Midoriya. The screen showed a photo of Fuku. Oh, that poor girl looks so scared. Mina cooed. Well, that's what she normally looks like, at least, that's what I'm told, Aizawa said. Anyway, her quirk is called Fear Gas. It allows her to release a gas that when inhaled, causes the victim to hallucinate their greatest fears, while also inhibiting logical brain functions, meaning you can't just get through it by telling yourself it's not real. It will make you think it's real. One of the people who inhaled it and was still able to speak full sentences afterward, described it as being trapped in a nightmare you can't wake from. That got some squeamish looks of horror on the students' faces. Also, if she gets overly panicked, she will accidentally release a burst of this gas. Oh, and she gets very easily spooked. Very easily. Aizawa told them, only adding to the feeling of unease. However, due to her natural fear of pretty much everything, she stays in her room almost all the time, which is built to handle her quirk. And there are gas masks to make sure that you don't inhale any of the gas. Lastly, the gas disperses rather quickly and is pretty hard to miss. So unless you're being an idiot, you shouldn't inhale it. Sighs of relief rang out amongst the class. Okay, next is Kai Midoriya. Aizawa showed an image of Kai, and he could practically hear Bakugo's blood pressure rise. Oh hey, it's the kid that sat on Bakugo. Kaminari pointed out with a snicker. That was hilarious. You wanna fight Sparkplug? I'll fucking kill you. Bakugo nearly jumped out of his seat and lunged at Kaminari. The fucking kid said that he was Deku's son. I was fucking in shock. That's fair ... but it was pretty funny though. Mina giggled. This kid is actually very well behaved, and causes less property damage than you'd expect, Aizawa revealed. Really, you just have to accommodate for this massive size. Which isn't an easy task, but other than that this kid won't give you much trouble. That being said, even with as careful as he is, it's not impossible for him to sit on you, so be on your toe. Grrrrrrrrrr. Bakugo growled, at the obvious jab at him. Next is Izuku Midoriya. When Aizawa showed the picture, he saw Shoji give the boy a look of pity. When touching him, his quirk sets anyone feeling a significant amount of fear on fire. Man, I've always wondered, why do quirks mess with people's appearances for no reason like this? Kaminari wondered out loud. Like, why does Tokoyami have a bird head? Why does Koda's quirk make him look like that? And why does Mina's acid-shooting quirk make her look like a hot alien? Jiro turned to Mina, and raised her ear jack, silently asking, "You want me to stab him?" Mina shook her head and silently responded with "Nah." That was more of a compliment than a perv moment. Jiro shrugged and brought her jack back down. Well, to be fair, Kaminari, I can actually see how his appearance coordinates with his quirk, Momo responded. His appearance seems to be meant to inspire fear, hence activating his quirk. Which is unfortunate. If he doesn't want to be a hero with his quirk, then it's only a detriment. Making him frighten the people around him and setting fire to others by accident. Shoji deeply sympathized with this kid. Firstly, he looked even less human than him, and secondly, while his quirk did cause some people to fear or despise him, at least he never had to worry about it spontaneously setting people on fire. He's pretty gentle, so none of you should have any real reason to be afraid of him. Eraserhead noted. And if you are, get over it. Moving on. Next on the screen was ... nothing. Many of the students looked at the screen confused, wondering why nothing was on screen. Okay, next is Midoriya, and we don't have any pictures of him. Aizawa massages his temple. The reason being is that he is the most elusive of all the children. His quirk allows him to enter some weird alternate dimension thing that lets him move around like a ghost. No one can see or hear him, and he can go through people and objects. This combined with his shy personality basically means that taking a picture of him is impossible. Honestly, you probably won't see him much if at all. Oh. Is that a challenge? Mina's face broke out into a dangerous grin. I'm gonna friend the hell out of that kid. Me too. One ghost to another. Taru joked. Oh, also one more thing, anything besides himself that goes into his dimension thing, will almost immediately start to disintegrate, Aizawa added. You should have started with that. Shouted a good chunk of the class in unison. Aizawa shrugged. Anyway, moving on. Now we have Midoriya. She is deaf, however instead of hearing voices she can hear your thoughts, and instead of speaking normally her voice is telepathic. So instead of being a possible threat to our health, she is a constant threat to our privacy. Todoroki summarized. We just have to be careful about what we think around her, Kaminari suggested. Well, that won't be a problem for you. All she's gonna hear from your head is dead silence. Jiro teased. As Kaminari said, watch your thoughts, and you'll be fine, Aizawa confirmed. Getting close to the end. Midoriya. You all should remember him. Yeah, Endeavor but Mina said. I wouldn't make that comparison, Todoroki added. Yeah, he has powerful uncontrollable flames. Fire is dangerous. Beware of fire. Aizawa looked at the clock. Clearly going faster so he could just get this done with. Anyway, moving on. Junkin and Nara. These two are kids with very powerful transformation quirks. They can both transform into 10 unique forms that all have their own uses. Nara isn't really a problem, but her brother might transform into a murderous ghost for 10 minutes if he gets too freaked out, so be careful. Now that's all the kids, so does anyone have any questions? Pretty much everyone raised their hands. Great. Well, hopefully, those questions are answered in these. Aizawa leaned down and took out a stack of 19 booklets. These should have all the details you need. And if they don't, then just figure it out. Anyway, you can spend the rest of class doing self-study. I spent all night putting together these freaking books, so I'll be on the ground if anyone needs me. But do me a favor and don't need me. And with that, the extremely tired teacher collapsed onto the floor, snuggled into his sleeping bag, and promptly fell asleep. Well, guys. Isn't this great? Okako said, trying to get people in the helping spirit. It's like a ... working vacation. A working vacation with the risk of a horrible death. My favorite kind of vacation. Jiro said, looking very much not in the spirit. Okako gave a soft glare and Jiro shrugged. Listen, I'm all about helping kids. But I'm not thrilled about a babysitting job where the penalty for messing up is death. But we're heroes, we're always risking our lives to help people. How is this any different? Okako asked the class. Because the villains we fight aren't as dangerous as these kids. Sero pointed out. I mean, I don't think anyone is against helping your boyfriend. I think we're just a bit unnerved about the high chance of death. Come on guys, they're just cute kids. Mina pointed out. Caretaker has been taking care of them for months, so they can't be that deadly. If Deku's managed to be around them that long and not die, you B-listers will be fine. Stop whining. Bakugo scoffed. I'm not happy about this taking away from our studies, but I'm more than willing to support a noble cause, Momo added with a sigh. To be fair, if we are getting paid as much as Aizawa alluded to, then all the time we lose doing this will be made up for with us not having to pick up part-time jobs. Tokoyami pointed out. Exactly. Not all of us are filthy rich like our privileged trio of Yamamoto, Prez, and Mr. Cold Shoulder. Kaminari added. Privileged trio. Momo and Ida shouted out in shock and outrage, while Todoroki raised an eyebrow. It's not like we have much of a choice on the matter, Karo. Not that I mind, Asui jumped into the conversation. We should just all... Not that I mind, Asui jumped into the conversation. We should just all take the time to enjoy this experience while trying not to die. Just like how being a hero should be. Exactly. Okako went up and hugged her froggy friend. Thanks, Tsu. Bakugo rolled his eyes. TCH. I came to get away from stupid Deku and now I can't stop hearing about him. What a fucking joke. What a fucking joke. Okay, so this chapter was mostly just to introduce Class 1A coming to the house. The next chapter will focus on Izuku reuniting with the kids and seeing what effect he's had on them, and Class 1A actually arriving at the house.